Hi and welcome to Valhalla Games episode 19. Yes, we step back in time. And this is not the lost episode, this is the saved episode. Dan and I recorded this a little while ago, and we're calling the series Our Wandering Monsters. Now, Dan goes into a little bit of detail in the main content of the program about that, but basically Our Wandering Monster is just a kind of an anomaly, something that's stuck out there. And for this episode, we talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Dan and I are brothers, for those of you who haven't listened to the podcast a lot and don't know. And when we were growing up, we were big Dungeons and Dragons players. And this episode is a little bit of a talk, a little bit of a journey back to that time. We start out with reminiscing about our days as D&D. And then towards the end, we get a bit philosophical, actually, about Dungeons & Dragons and why it's a great game, why you should play it, and all the things that, the life lessons that we've learnt from Dungeons & Dragons. Sounds corny, I know, but have a listen, see if you agree, and either way, I hope this is interesting. We'll be back soon with episode 19, the Dungeons & Dragons episode.
I'm already late. Late for what? I'm going on an adventure.
Hey, welcome back everybody. So we've been threatening to do this a long time. This episode is our first Wandering Monsters episode. Like Wandering Monsters you get in a role-playing game, or specifically Dungeons & Dragons, it is in a random subject. And our random subject is going to be role-playing, and more specifically Dungeons & Dragons. So we're going to get straight into it. Rex, how did you get into role-playing, and more specifically Dungeons & Dragons?
Okay, well that's a long time ago, Dan. I might be showing my age. I can barely remember my own name these days because us old guys. But way back when I was 16. Our mum saw a cutting in the paper, because apparently that's where you got all your news. Apparently there was no internet back in the 80s. I just can't understand how we survived that. But our mum saw a picture in the paper and was able to deduce from that tiny little ad that might be something that I might be interested in. And the ad ran something like this: Dungeons and Dragons for sale. Inquire here for boys that walk to the beat of a different drum, a new and exciting game, something like that.
Yeah, well, it certainly did what it said on the tin, because it was very new and exciting. What year was this approximately?
You might have a better idea than I do, Dan, because your memory for such things is a lot better than mine. But I seem to remember I was about 15. I was certainly still going to school. So yeah, I'm.
Well, I think if we look at the so we could probably tell a story about the car trip. Let's tell a story about the car trip in a minute and going to Auckland.
Yeah.
But the product you so do you want to tell this story, and then I'll describe what product it was and why it places it as a year for me.
Right.
So should we describe the great car trip?
So our family was very much like homebodies. I'm not sure that translates to other places around the world, but we like to stay home. Mum loved her gardening. Dad loved his building. Dad would work on the weekends. We didn't really do a lot. We didn't really go a lot of places when we were young.
No, Mum and Dad were exceptionally hard workers to get ahead for the family, and
very hard workers.
Yeah.
So Dad would work often on the weekends, and we didn't really do a lot. We didn't go on any big trips when we were young, but every now and then we used to drive from Whangarei, the place that we lived in, to Auckland, which was it's probably about nearly 2 hours drive, I suppose, now, and back then it was probably longer.
Back then it was probably, by the time you stopped for something to eat, the roads weren't straightened out. It probably took 4 or 5 or 6 hours back then. It was like a day getting down there.
Yeah, it was a massive outing. So this is all those years ago. That was a huge thing for us, and we would go to Auckland. You know, it was just like I'd only done it maybe.
Well, time off work, unheard of. Going away, spending money to stay in somewhere else when you had a house at home, that was damn near unheard of as well. And going that long distance all the way to do it, to the big smoke, Auckland being New Zealand's largest city, that also was a, so it was a really big thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. You know, to put it in perspective, once we hit our maybe late teens, sometimes we would drive to Auckland for a hamburger, you know, and that people would call us crazy, and that was crazy. But you know, back in those days, people didn't really move around so much. You know, back in the 80s. And so we went down there.
This is very early 80s, and I'm gonna place what year I think it was shortly
Right.
when we talk about the shopping trip.
So Mum and Dad in the front, and you and I in the back seat, Dan, and we're off to Auckland. No seatbelts in the back of the car in those days. We're off to Auckland, and we've got all our toys and whatever, and then we went down to Queen Street and Karangahape Road, and somewhere around there, we went into the shop and we bought, I don't remember the buying of it, but we bought this game box, and then we got it in the car, and I was like, oh, I've got to unwrap it, I've got to unwrap it before we get there. And I remember unwrapping, and I remember a certain song was playing on the radio, and it's a very, very vivid memory, one of those weird things. And then we got back to the motel that we'd hide for the night, and we got it out, and we decided we were going to play a game, and got this thing out. It was like there was no pieces, there was no boards, and all these crazy dice. Like how do you move the piece around the board? There isn't a board, and we just completely did not understand how to play the game. It was just so absolutely foreign to us. The saying, there's nothing new under the sun. Because if you have chess, and then you have this, and then you have this, and then you have this, and wargaming is kind of an extension of those type of things. And you've got Monopoly, and then you've got the next game that builds on that, and the next game that builds on that, and you've got normal playing cards, 52 card playing cards, and then you've got other ones with special cards and whatever. And it seems like everything's a build on of something else. But that game, Dungeons and Dragons in the early 80s, which I know obviously it came out earlier than that, but it was revolutionary. There was nothing at all like it that anybody that I certainly had ever seen, that anybody that I met had ever seen. It was something just completely brand new, and unheard of, to the point where we actually had no concept of how to play it, even after we bought the box.
No. So I'll tell you what I remember that night. I remember thinking that we had a game for the family to play, and opening the box, and you ended up, and Mum and you sort of looked at it and went, and Dad was like, oh, whatever, that's a bit of a bloody dead loss then, isn't it? You'll have to read it. And you spent the night colouring in the with your white crayon that come in the box, colouring in your light blue coloured polyhedral dice with the crayon in the number slots, and then wiping it off so you could read the numbers better. And that's all you achieved that night, apart from looking in the rule book. Yeah,
I remember that. And you know what? I've still got those dice. They're still my main go-to dice for D&D. So they've done pretty well. I got my money's worth out of those.
Yeah, I remember that trip, and I'll tell you. So you got the Tom Moldvay edition box set of basic D&D, the red box set, and that it was released in 1981, and I think that places it at probably the end of 1981 that you got it, by the time it got to New Zealand, or maybe 6 months after they come out in America or something like that, with the shipping, I guess. Which makes sense, I think, building into a time frame of our past. What do you reckon?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yep, 81. Yep, that sounds about right. Yep.
And based on your playing of it when and memories of her mother and stuff like that. And I remember that trip really well, because in essence it was a bit of a shopping trip, really, which again is extremely unusual for a frugal sort of a family. And I remember that I'd helped Dad build some dog houses, and so I'd got some spending money, and I bought a 1/6 scale Action Man, or G.I. Joe posable action figure or a doll, some might say. My father was certainly worried about it, calling it a doll. I bought a Jeep, a Willys Jeep, for my Action Man at the same time, and I was there putting on my adhesive sort of reflectors, sort of glass beads to be the headlights and stuff like that. Well, you were messing around with this book, and I was like, sucker, look at him colouring in those dice, and I've got this awesome Jeep.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that. You had that for years.
And I also remember at that same shop, and I think we might have got a Parnell to get that your D&D set. Does that ring a bell for you, or do you think you actually got it on Queen Street?
I haven't been to New Zealand for. Sorry, I haven't been to New Zealand for a few years, and I certainly haven't been down in central Auckland for a few years. Is it Karangahaki Road that goes across the top of Queen Street?
It's down off Karangahaki Road, but you could have got it on Karangahaki Road.
Yeah, I sort of have a feeling it was in there, but yeah. And I've kept.
But I remember in the same shop, because I'd played a lot of I played a lot of choose your own adventure game books at the time, and you get them out from the library, and they're quite big, and quite thing where you flick to a certain page for this and flick to a certain page for that. Do you remember those books?
I do. I've still got some actually.
Choose your own adventure.
I've got some on my shelf.
Okay.
I bought some for my kids to get the 1981 experience.
Nice. Well, I remember when you in the same shop that you got your D&D box set, your Tom Mulvey box set. I got Mum took pity on me, I think, because you were getting something and I'd already got something, so I don't know why I was entitled to anything else. But I remember getting an Endless Quest book, which is the Dungeons and Dragons, the TSR version of these choose your own adventure books, and it was called Endless Quest, and there was a series, and at that time they only had one in the shop, but it was called Pillars of Pentagon, and it was a sort of tan colour, and it had a picture of like a skeletal sort of dinosaur, I think, or a dragon maybe. I think dragon makes more sense to me, a skeletal sort of dragon on the front. And this book was like, I was really into this book, and it was, I think you might have read that at some stage as well. It sort of helped you sort of picture maybe a little bit what Dungeons and Dragons was about.
I'm back. I was just going to my bookshelf because I actually think that's the one that I got, just as it happens. But yes, it is D&D light in some respects, isn't it? It actually gives you a concept of being able to build your own story. Because when you get the new box, the new book, these days, or the box, you can get the starter set now. But you open it up, it's like, what do I do with this? I don't quite understand. Like, where are the game pieces? And what you're thinking it's a game, so it's something that's building on Monopoly or Cluedo or something like that. But it's really not that. It's really telling a story. And so the Find Your Own Adventure books kind of are actually a better lead-in to the game than what that is. And I'm sure we'll talk about D&D miniatures and that later, but yeah, essentially it's a book-telling game, isn't it? It's a storytelling game.
Yep, for sure. So you've got this box, and you've got to read. You've decided night one, oh my god, I've got to read this book here, and I've got these dice that I've just crayoned in the numbers on. So you took it back to Whangarei, our hometown, and then obviously you had to get some people together to play the game. So who was playing in your group? What was the composition of your dungeon party? And I'm really interested in how you gather them together when this is a new thing, more or less, to hit the streets. I know D&D's been around since sort of mid to late 70s. 77 was AD and stuff like that. And the Blue Homes edition box, the first box set before the Tom Mulvey basic D&D box set. But basically it's a new thing. So how did you go and get these people together? And once you got this dungeon party of people together, what kept you guys together in real life as well as in the game?
Well, the main thing, there's two things that I did to actually get the party together. One was I just whined a lot.
To your mates or to our parents?
I just whined and whined and whined and just wore them down like a war of attrition until they eventually came and played with me, because nobody was really that interested. And the other thing that I did is once I started to explain to them how to play the game, they still didn't seem very interested, so I bribed them with magic items, in-game magic items.
Right. Right,
yeah.
okay.
And so here's a spoiler alert. do not bribe your party with in-game magic items and give them magic items to make them so powerful that they're nearly unbeatable, because it kind of reduces the enjoyment of the game for everybody. But yeah. So I had a few guys, Michael, Michael from the chemist shop. I had Stephen. I had Russell. I had Kevin. Chris. And all these guys have gone on, and I've sort of really lost track with them. All those guys went on to university after school. All those guys went on to university after school, except Kevin, who went into the army, and I lost track of them to some degree, and sort of, took up with a new bunch of buddies. But yeah, so Facebook and all that, I'm sort of roughly in contact with them now. I could kind of track them down if I wanted to. But yeah, those guys, don't really catch up with them anymore. They're still back in New Zealand, and I'm over here in Australia, and we didn't really have any reason to catch up, except maybe do a D&D get together game perhaps sometime in the future. But yeah, they were all really great guys, and they really, after the first couple of goes stumbling through it, I think we really enjoyed it, and we played for years and years and years. So from when I was about 15 till probably about 2 years, till I was had left school and gone into a job, and I guess probably until they went off to university. So. And there was no physical way that we could actually play the game anymore. But we certainly gave it a good go. Many hours of D&D playing. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And question: Did some of these guys get attracted to the group and then become your friends afterwards? Are they all sort of as friends, and then you sort of swayed them over to role playing with you?
I think it was all friends that sort of came over to role playing. So we had a kind of a reasonably close group that was involved in Venture Scouts, and it was mostly guys from there, or if not, then they ended up coming into there as well. So for our geek fulfillment, we had D&D, and for our physical outdoors, New Zealand's a great country for outdoor pursuits, and rock climbing and caving and rafting and whatever else. So when we weren't playing D&D, we were out doing the Venture Scout thing.
Yeah, I wonder if if having that confidence that come from being a Venture Scout and those sort of outdoors activities, and the confidence that grows from that in oneself, I wonder if that helped in sort of sitting down to do what's basically acting in front of your friends, when role playing's not a massive accessible thing like it is now, and in air quotations acceptable. At the time, it was very much out of the box, and I wonder if the confidence that you all gained from those activities let you be confident sitting down and role playing together.
Yeah, I don't know about that. We had, some parties do, or some groups of people, should I say, do very much the role-playing thing. I've seen people dress up and and fully act out their characters with personality and voice and all that. We never did any of that. That just seemed a bit weird for us. So we played the part of the characters in terms of the made the choices that they would do, but the actual voice acting in that, I mean, we would have the occasional conversation to actually just see how it was going to plan out. If Farmer John, approaches you and says blah blah blah, and then a conversation would ensue after that. But yeah, we didn't really do a lot of that voice acting stuff. And arguably, and I think we'll probably come onto this later, certain things that D&D is, and certain things that D&D isn't. And if you're out there with costume on, acting, and playing D&D in the sewers, down from your local, for the local school, you're not actually playing D&D. You're playing some other game, and so we certainly did keep it to a tabletop game, and we didn't really venture too much into that role playing type of thing.
All right, so it's 1981. This is pretty much a brand new thing to New Zealand after being a big thing overseas. You guys got in a small town. There's no internet. There's no forums. So were you aware of any other groups in your hometown or around the area playing at the time? And was there a sense of it actually being a community, or did you guys feel unique or special maybe, or even alone in the hobby? Because it's can be a little bit insular. It certainly wasn't mainstream.
Absolutely alone. There was nobody else that I ever heard of for years and years and years that played D&D. Nobody else that I met or ever talked to had ever heard of the game at all, negative, positive in any way. It was just us, just 5 guys, a couple of guys that come and go, but essentially 5 or 6 guys that were no girls, by the way, and that we would just.
Well, of course not, because he had said boys that marched to a different drum, so no girls, no, definitely not.
We did play with some girls a little bit later on, kind of as one-off, kind of hey, we've got this crazy game, let's orchestrate a game for you. But yeah, the core group was all blokes, so it's an interesting dynamic for sure. But no, we didn't know of anybody else. The only person that I ever knew that played D&D was you later and your group.
Yeah, for sure. Well, maybe we'll talk about that shortly. You'll get to turn some of these questions on their head. But first, I'm interested and I think I know some of these answers, but I've got a really good memory, but every now and then something comes flooding back that I sort of hadn't remembered before. So I'm looking for you jogging my memory again. So what adventures and / modules, there's a word that the players of the modern editions may not understand, and what setting, as in which world or whatever were you playing, and did you feel like you progressed through the available Dungeons & Dragons system, like you started off at basic box set Tom Moldvay edition D&D? Where did you go from there, and what adventures were you playing?
Yeah, well, last night, very late before our podcast today, I decided I better drag out all the old books, right? So I went to the chest. I've got a sound effect that I'll play for you in a second. Hang on.
Oh, that does sound authentic.
It does. That's one of our mum's old steel chests, which is perfectly suited for keeping the treasures of Dungeons and Dragons.
I know that chest. Do you keep your D&D stuff in there?
I do, that big brown one, yep.
Oh, wow. Let's hope it's not a mimic then. No,
I managed to get out. No traps, but lucky there was no traps because I forgot to check. But so I went in the chest, and I don't know, it doesn't all seem to be there. I'm not sure where it's gone. Hopefully it's around somewhere. But the first game that we played was The Legend of Bone Hill, which I think is L1 or L2.
Or Secret of Bone Hill, yep.
Yep, and so for some reason I don't seem to have that. And I know it's around because I was going to play it with my son a couple of years ago.
I might challenge you on that. I don't think that was the first one you played. I think because it came in the Tom Moldvay box, I think the first one you played was the Caves of Keep on the Borderlands.
Yes, you're right. See, this is why I've got you, Dan, because you've got the good memory. Keep on the Borderlands, yes, a classic.
Okay, well, can I? It's time for me to interject.
All right, okay.
Okay. So the reason why I've got a good memory is so some of the reason for doing this podcast is actually going to come out now. The reason why this is I've got such a good memory and about this in particular is because I must have sat down and watched almost every Dungeons and Dragons session you guys did, and watched and listened and sat there. I don't know what possessed you to allow me to do this. I suggest Mum told you that I was going to be there to watch because she thought it'd somehow be interesting, but she was right, and I think I was so good and so into it that I think you quickly thought, you might as well let him sit there then. He can get us our drinks of water or something while we're playing. But to me, Dungeons & Dragons is actually a really quite an emotional, positive memory. I sat there, to me it was like some people may get these days when they go online and they watch gamers play games of like video games for hours. I sat there and took it in, and I can't remember any of the life discussions you guys would have had randomly between stating what your characters are going to do, but I can remember so many things about the sessions and the miniatures you played with and stuff, which I'll probably talk about later. And it's such a good feeling for me. I later became a player, but the memories are really strong for me watching this. This, and then later on, I played with another set of really, really good friends. Each time I've played actually has been with really, really good friends, and that's probably a thing about Dungeons & Dragons. So for me, the hobby is an amazing set of fantastic memories for each group. So yeah, it's definitely Caves of Chaos, and the Keep of the Borderlands, the actual module. But obviously, I remember a lot more, and I guess the whole thing around it really was selling forward from the Castellan's Keep on the Borderlands there towards the Caves of Chaos, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that we did very early on is we didn't actually, to answer your other question, we didn't actually have a world setting until quite a little while on. I mean, D&D is a long game, right? It's a game that kind of never ends. You can die by the sword, or you can die of old age, but apart from that, you can just keep coming back to it and back to it and back to it. So
I think that's really actually tracks the progress of the D&D system, because we had, I mean, the Keep on the Borderlands didn't even have a name until in the module, and it didn't have a name until later on, I think in the 25th anniversary edition of that module, and then it became called the Castellan's Keep. But the world itself didn't even have a name until later. I think it was called Mystara. The actual world that was in basic, and then the expert set, and then so on and so forth, and then it was expanded in Gazetteers. But it wasn't at the time, I don't think, of basic, the Tom Mulvad edition basic D&D. I don't think the world even had a name. Greyhawk and Blackmore were from the AD&D game that came out in '77. But yeah, the basic set didn't really have a world, did it?
no, well, not that we knew of. Again, without the internet, without anybody to sort of bounce ideas off and get things, you're really only limited to. It's like back in the day, when you wanted to know something about, I don't know, steam engines, you would go to the library and get the one book that they had on steam engines, and that was it. That was the source. That was the sum total of the knowledge that you were able to obtain. The only other option you had was to buy, for a completely unrealistic amount of money, a new hardcover book from somewhere that you have to order it in, so you have to buy it sight unseen. It just really was a different world, us old guys. But so later on,
yeah, I remember buying the mum buying me for my birthday, I think, an Usborne. How that Osborne had like a soft cover sort of fool's cap size books of how to do party tricks or something, which I think you had, and I had one, the Osborne Giant Guide to Castles or something, and learning about battlements and sieges and stuff like that. And I think we both got into that to learn more about castles.
Yeah, I remember that for sure. But so what you had really is what you were able to afford to buy. We weren't particularly wealthy at the time. We were fine, but we didn't have money to splash around. So eventually, one of the guys in the group bought the World of Greyhawk, and I've got it here in my hot hand. Is the actual original World of Greyhawk map. So it comes in a book,
yep.
And like a book sort of form, like I don't know, folder, I guess, and then you open it out and there's the map in there. So that's 1980, copyright 1980. I mean, obviously I didn't buy it in 1980, but it can't have been very long after that. So that was our world that we adopted eventually once we got worldly enough to realize that there was, once you start having one or two or three modules all strung together, then you needed to sort of place them somewhere in the world, at least just for the purpose of travel between modules, and to work out how many wandering monsters you were going to encounter during that travel.
So the modules were basically a pre-packaged, commercially available adventure. They were about they were sort of cardboard, sort of fold-out covers with some maps and that in them, and they were about, I don't know, standard I think it was about 26 pages long, and that was your adventure. For anyone who's listening that plays the current editions, that sort of have it's called an adventure, and it's like a hardback book, and it's, it was very much module. It makes it sound much smaller and much more, I guess, fit into your setting a bit more. So it's actually probably quite a good name for it, wasn't it, at the time?
Yeah, I think so too. And the modules all had numbers as well. So if you go online, you can actually find them all, like in terms of work out what they all are. But you've got X1, X2, X3, which is the Isle of Dread, the first one, the second one, the third one, and then you'd move on to another one. And those X1, X2, X3 things would be the Isle of Dread. I've got in my hot hand at the moment. X1 is character levels 3 to 7, and then presumably X2 would be 7 to whatever, and X3 would be something else on that. I'm not sure if there was 3 in that series, but yeah, and then you would slot these modules in, and you wouldn't necessarily need to do 1 or 2 or 3 modules together, and we wouldn't even need to do the first one or the last one. You could just, because they were modular, you could just slip them in based on your character level, so that they were the appropriate difficulty based on your character level, and you could build your world like that. And the module like the Isle of Dread, you could just randomly pick an island on the big Greyhawk map, and then that would be the Isle of Dread, and then you'd have to travel there, get on a ship, whatever. But to come back to what you were saying before about Venture Scouts and that, I think some of the skills that we learned in D&D were able to transfer over to, I guess, life skills and vice versa, which sounds kind of crazy because, isn't D&D all about, attacking evil creatures and chopping them up and that? But, it was so much more to it than that, working out how to solve problems, how to travel, how to get around this issue, and how to equip yourself. And that was one thing that we were doing at the time. We'd go caving for 6 hours. When you go caving, what do you need to take? So literally we would go caving because a lot of caves around our...
Your rope, your backpack, your lantern, your torches.
Yeah, well, maybe not a lantern, but yeah, so...
Your oilskin.
Yeah, so we'd, when we went caving, like literally we'd go caving with the Venture Scouts, and we'd go, and we'd take our backpacks and all our equipment and everything, and we'd go in there and we'd know what to take because we knew, what we were in for, because we'd played D&D. I know it sounds corny to say that, but some of those things did cross credit. And then we went caving, and then we'd have more knowledge. Me as a DM, I'd have more knowledge to be able to make more realistic descriptions of what was going on in the game. We went rock climbing, so rock climbing, yeah, we've got to do that. We've got to bring that into the game. So the guys would have, do you have a piton or some sort of, how are you handling your rope situation? And we'd actually be able to bring our real world knowledge into the game, in a fun way, and play it in the game. So yeah.
Interesting. And you mentioned the Isle of Dread there, which of course was included in the I think it's the Cook version of the blue box set, which is the expert box set. So there's definitely some progression there, because you guys started in the basic box set, then you went to expert, and then I know for a fact you ended up on AD&D. So what happened there?
Yeah, so that was a bit of a nightmare, actually. The rules are complicated enough as it is, but to start with the basic rules, and then to move to expert, as both the modules that you were playing sort of required it, but also as we got, as we sort of lusted after more realism and more ability to be able to, I guess, have granular decisions, so instead of just being a broad thing, I move to the thing and I climb up the wall. Well, we wanted to know, how do you climb the wall? Is that going to be successful? So we were lusting after this kind of more realism and more ability and more dice rolling and longer sessions. And then when the Advanced D&D came out, I bought the DM's Guide from that, and that was just, I still remember. It's got a weird font. It's got a weird font in that version 1 AD&D book.
It's tiny. I think it's like 8 point or something font. It's there is so much in that menu.
And when and it's sort of like Arial narrow, like it's a very narrow font, because they had to just fit so much in there, and the tables are done in a certain style. And every time when I think of D&D, or even I open that book, I get that sort of that font kind of. Sometimes I see it, I see that font. It's like, oh, D&D font, and all the memories come flooding back, of that. It's really weird. Yeah,
I get it. So it's funny because we're in New Zealand and we've got this D&D and stuff like that. AD&D, I mean, those manuals are put out in 1977. And then they were re-released in, I think, about 1982, with different covers but the same content on them. But I can... Yeah, so it's funny, so they were definitely out before the Moldvay and Cook basic D&D set and expert D&D set, which you guys had. But I guess by virtue of the name, even though it was a different game, it was very much a different game to get around sort of copyright things and stuff like that. Which, I mean, look into the history of D&D and AD&D people. The D&D box sets keep coming out as more or less just so that they didn't lose, TSR didn't lose the rights to the game, when AD&D had sort of been a main effort perhaps for a couple of years. But you genuinely progressed basic, expert, then advanced Dungeons and Dragons as if that was the progression, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. We progressed as our characters progressed. But the thing that we were, that we found with all that stuff that was going on with Gary Gygax and all that sort of stuff. I've got a book actually on it here, right in my hot hand, which is Empire of Imagination, Gary Gygax and the Birth of Dungeons and Dragons. Very, very, very good book in terms of the politics of it, written by Michael Wiltswer. So if you're interested in it, check that out. It was very interesting.
Yeah, it's a great book.
We didn't know anything about any of that, so we
didn't have a clue.
No internet. It's just like you. Even now, even me, I just almost can't believe that we had no internet back then, and kids that are growing up now, my kids and that, they've just, the concept just completely eludes them. But we had no idea why these things were changing. And all we knew was what we saw in the books that we got at the local store. But even before that, a lot of the stuff that we got was mail order. And there was no local store.
That's true. I mean, we had no idea about what was going on, and I doubt people probably in America knew what was going on unless you happened to be close to the circle of TSR, or went to Gen Con frequently, or you're in the wargaming groups that sort of splintered off or were associated with the wargaming groups that Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson were sort of associated with, or you were subscribed to one or two of the periodicals, like the literally sort of homemade, printed off, typed up newsletters that they'd send out by hand. Because apart from those, the only thing we had that was periodical was Dragon magazine, which was hard to get, very expensive. It was rare you got it. You sort of got it for like Christmases or birthdays, or maybe you saved up if you got some money for something. But it was definitely like a splurge of money, and they certainly, being a TSR publication, they certainly didn't tell you what was going on.
Yeah, that's right. And that was only really late in the piece. I mean, maybe not for you because you're a little bit younger and came on the scene a little bit after me, but for me, that was very late in the D&D thing that we actually even saw one of those magazines. And I think we've mentioned before in the podcast that our family didn't have a credit card till very late, like we just didn't, New Zealand's in some ways, I don't know, 10 or 15 years behind the rest of the world in a lot of ways, like in really good ways, you can still talk to people about, it wasn't so long ago that we never used to bother locking our house. We'd just go out and, and just leave the house unlocked. It was like a very quaint kind of community.
That's right. We're 50s going into 60s here.
Yeah. I mean, maybe not now, but and with with the internet and all that, it brings you up to speed pretty quick. But back then, it was very, very quaint. I remember even when I got my first job when I was 16, you got paid in cash, and you went and got your pay packet, which was literally a packet of money. And everybody would get, the payroll lady would do them all up, and everybody would come around and sign for their packet of money. And then, you'd get your $125, which was my first weekly wage for 40 hours. And then, you'd go home and then you'd spend your money on whatever, or you'd put your money into the bank. You'd literally go and walk to the bank and put your money in the bank so that you could write a check to pay your bills. And so buying things from overseas, and certainly buying exotic things like Dungeon magazine or Dragon magazine, was just beyond us. It was just, as kids, our parents wouldn't have been able to cope with it. The only way that we could buy anything was to go to the post office and get a money order, which I don't know if you can still do that, but that's just completely unheard of now.
So you guys were obviously sourcing a product from somewhere, and I'm wondering if you remember the shop's name in town that you were getting it from in our town, but I do. But so where were you guys getting your stuff from? Because you had a group, and you had a steady stream of modules, and I specifically remember the original Dungeons and Dragons, AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, which you had, because you were the Dungeon Master.
Yeah, that's right. I was the Dungeon Master for the entire time that we played. Actually, no, Stephen Smith was the Dungeon Master for a short period, but apart from that, I was the DM for the entire time, and I just loved it.
Nice.
But no, I don't remember. I remember JP Woods, the bookshop down from us, was the main source later on. But earlier, I don't know what we did. We must have just been mail order. I know we had miniatures, which, do you want to come on to miniatures later?
Yeah. See, I think I don't think JP Woods is that long getting them. I think JP Woods got them towards the end of '82. Because our mother passed away in '83, and I specifically remember that they had stuff on the shelves at that time when I went there with our mum. So it's definitely '82 or '83. They had some stuff on the shelves there. I think I remember seeing some modules there more so than rule books. So that means there must have been some other people in town playing it if they had a demand.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it. The only time, very much later on, when I did hear of somebody playing it, I was like, yeah, they're probably not playing it properly.
As if.
We had the way of playing. We used to call it the game. Do you want to play the game? Because it was the game. Like, there was no other game. You guys play Monopoly or cards or whatever. We play the game, like the ultimate game. There is nothing better than this game. And I've got to say, is there anything better than D&D? Like, it's so wide and vast, and even now in 2021, is there a game that's more customizable, that's more in depth, that lasts longer? I mean, how long does your average game of Monopoly last?
It's the ultimate wargaming campaign. It is the
ultimate wargaming campaign. A wise man once said that. I think it may have been you, Dan.
I do remember another place in town. So Cameron's of Carmo, which is a small toy shop on the corner by the traffic lights in Carmo, started getting some stuff. But when it became a toy world in about 84, 83, 84, became a chain, a franchise of toy shops, and it became a toy world. And at that stage, they had lots of D&D stuff, and they had more than JP Woods in town as it goes. Do you remember that?
I have to take the one on your word, Rain Man.
Well, I remember getting 3 Dragon magazines for you with the money I got given to buy you a Christmas present. And I remember looking through them at the art, carefully to make sure I wasn't damaging them, and picking each, because there were several months there, and picking up the issues and looking through and going, because I was probably as adept at picking stuff for your group as you guys were, because I'd watched all these sessions because I were all at our house because you were the dungeon master, and our mother supported you, enabled you doing it by creating the space and the table, and I think she, made sure that everything was all set up and you guys had chips and drinks and everything like that, and then. Yeah, but basically I remember buying the Dragon magazines and choosing one or two or three, I think it might have been two actually, because three would have been extravagant, to choose for you, and the guy that owned the shop thinking I was shoplifting because because I was, and probably looked as if I was stalling or waiting to, to run out of the shop with something because I was looking at these magazines all the time. I was going, oh no, I'm just having a look and seeing, because this one's about character classes and the Cavalier character class, which seems interesting for my brother. But this one here's got a lot of Marvel superhero role-playing game stuff in it, and I'm not sure whether he'll like that. So I'm just choosing. And he looked at me and went, yeah, I can leave this guy alone. He's not shoplifting.
Yeah.
But I also bought in that store, I bought, and you're going to remember this book because, who played the dwarf in your group?
Stephen.
And what was his name again?
Gregor the dwarf.
Okay, Gregor the dwarf, yes. And I remember buying my second TSR Endless Quest sort of pick-a-path book, and it was called Revolt of the Dwarves. And I remember you guys got great amusement out of it, saying, revolting dwarves.
Yep.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, for sure. Yep. It's interesting.
And I also remember buying the Phineas Fingers compilation. Phineas Fingers was a thief, an extremely poor thief, from the original days of AD&D, that had a monthly comic strip in Dragon magazine, and with his friends Charlie and Ralph, I think, and they were fighting against the Halfling Thieves Guild that were trying to murder them all and take over the town. Remember that?
Yep. Yeah, it brings back some memories, all right.
And I remember you guys had miniatures, and I remember what they were, and I remember where you got them. Wilkinson's Sports was a sports store in town that you walked through the sports store and went up this little ramp, like wheelchair ramp, and at the back of the store you had things like 172 scale model things of model soldiers, and that's where I got my Esky or Etileri or whatever they were, Napoleonics and stuff from. But also up there, they had Britain's toy soldiers, and the sort of plastic toy soldiers that had some lead components or metal components, and certainly a metal base as well. And I remember you guys had Britain's toy soldiers, medieval knights on foot with morning stars and pikes and swords and stuff.
Yeah,
Do you
still
remember
got
those?
a couple of them somewhere. Yeah, and painted them up with Humbrol oil-based paints. The stink of it.
That was painful.
Oh my gosh. Yep.
Yeah. But they helped you visualize the game on the table, and again, that was another step that I think helped gameplay, but also helped me visualize things, and again, it was like the whole, D&D as a spectator sport is what I did long before it was trendy on the internet. That's for sure. I was a spectator of D&D.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to talk about miniatures now, because now we've digressed into a kind of a blend. If you go and have a look at Black Magic Craft on YouTube or something like that, some of the stuff that people are playing with is nearly photorealistic, like the amazing dungeons that they play with. And I do, I think back to our times of, I had some plastic spaces from something, I don't know what they were for, some yellow plastic spaces, and they were my monsters. Just something about, I don't know, maybe 2.5 inches tall by an inch by an inch. And then we had a gridded board, which was made up of just paper with some lines hand drawn on it, and then on top of that we had cover seal, the pages for doing the school kids books to keep them from getting daggy dog ears. Long
before laminating.
Yeah, before laminating.
A thing that people could do at home.
So we'd stick that cover seal stuff on it, and then we could draw on there with marker pens, texters, whatever you want to call them, and map out our dungeons from there for fights only, just so we could get the perspective of where people were, so it's like I come up behind saying, oh, no, you don't, you're away, you're actually in front out to the side. Oh, okay. So to avoid that sort of thing, we would we would fight out our games in a wargaming type of way, quite similar to something like Kings of War Vanguard, very, very similar mechanics, and so you had flanking arcs and rears and that sort of thing. But in terms of the actual the game, it was very much the theatre of the mind, Dan. And I still firmly believe that to play D&D in the way that's going to give you those long-term memories, so 30 years later, to be able to remember exactly what happened. Remember when you walked into that, you walked into that hall and there was a guy hanging on the wall, by chains and blah, 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 blah. If you see that with a plastic 3D printed dungeon, I don't think you're going to remember it. But if the DM describes it evocatively and describes the beads of sweat running from his filthy face, and the sound of the chains, and the low moan of the wind rushing through the doorways, over the bubble of the small stream that runs from left to right through that chamber. You actually build it in your mind, and it becomes as real as nearly a memory. You can remember it and you can recall it because you've built it in your mind, more so even than a real thing, because a real thing you've only observed it, whereas in your mind you built it. And look, my interpretation of that cavern is probably quite a bit different to Stephen's idea of that cavern, and Chris's was different again. But where it mattered, we had the maps, and where it mattered, we had the miniatures. But everybody else would build and construct this world, and so memorable because you had built it from scratch in your memory. So yeah,
it's certainly memorable for me. And when you started, you were 15 and I was 8. So I didn't get to play in any of those games, but I certainly felt like I was playing along with you, and those memories and stuff. And I went from watching you guys playing that to and listening, but being a spectator sport to me. I remember buying the Warlock of Firetop Mountain Fighting Fantasy game book when it came up in our school book club thing, and then going, wow, I can play by myself now. And then eventually I had some older friends. A lot of my friends are all older based on the fact they lived around me, and my first games that I played were with my friends Donald and Roddy, who live across, brothers who lived across the park from us. We lived looking at across the park, and you could literally see their house from across the road, and their friend Carl, my friend Carl as well. We're playing the game there, and our first module we ever played was the Secret of Bone Hill, an AD&D. Building memories with each other. And I remember the best times, because they were a few years older than me, just the best times of my life were watching those games with you guys playing, and then building on top of that when you stopped playing because you'd moved away and you were or you were in your full-time employment or whatever the case was, and I continued playing with them. And the best times are when they weren't out, because they were older than me, they weren't out for the night doing something, and they'd made time. They'd decided that night or that Friday night was going to be a D&D night, and I got invited over and run across the park and play D&D for 4 hours or something, and then run back home. So it was just the best times, a feeling of inclusion and good feelings. And I also played a bit in school at lunchtimes. This around, that would have been about 84, 85, and the ninja explosion. A lot of popular culture was around ninjas for some reason, all the American movies and stuff. And I remember my friends David and Paul, and we were playing, Oriental Adventures, the sort of Oriental based in the world, the fantasy worlds, and we played a lot of like ninja-esque and sort of samurai sort of stuff, and it didn't really do as much for me, so I sort of dropped that and went back to what I knew best and enjoyed the most. And then I've carried on playing it, and right up to today. But I have as many memories about the old system, and I actually play to this day. I prefer to play AD&D, original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, over any other system, because I love, dare I say it, because it's not that simple. I love sort of what I call a simplicity of the system in regards to character classes, just enough so you could, just a little bit more than basic or expert, where you could be a race but also a class.
Yep.
You could be a dwarf but also a fighter, a dwarf, or a cleric or something as well. A little bit step on from what basic and expert were, but not so much that we now have, every book that comes out in the current edition, we have 3 or 4 new classes and new races to play. It's just that perfect balancing point to me between simplicity but also enough depth to really, get to grips with and sink your teeth into.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point actually. I know when D&D 4th edition came out, which I never played and I never owned any of the products, but I saw the artwork, and we've talked in the last podcast actually about how artwork invokes a certain kind of a thing about, like a theme of how the game's going to play. In our original, in the very original versions, it was very much chainmail kind of esque stuff. It was, medieval guys fighting. You had your thieves and halflings and that, which, you couldn't call them hobbits because that was a copyright issue. We did know that at least. But halflings and that sort of stuff. But as well as that, you had your very basic stereotype kind of characters, and nowadays I think almost we look down on that as being too basic, too simple. And when the 4th edition rules came out, the guys had unrealistically large battle axes which they could never lift, and huge shoulders and that sort of thing. And it really sort of, I looked at it and I just went, I can see what you're aiming for here now. Everybody needs to be a 25th level fighter with superhuman strength and that. And that was one thing that we really didn't do in our games, and I think we were better for the experience. We really were pretty typical kind of human characters, or close to human characters that were frail and were fragile and could die. And the fact that we were, our characters were human enough to be like that gave us a game that we could more relate to. This sort of, everybody's got their own thing, but the idea of playing half dragon, to me, just kind of, it really does turn me off, because it's too kind of, it's too fantasy. It's too much fantasy. I can't sort of visualize myself as being half a dragon. I can visualize myself as, maybe losing 20 kgs and going to the gym for a year, and then putting on a backpack, picking up a sword, and going off to battle. And it wasn't so much about the advancement. There's that cliche of, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, and that's very much how we played our games. Was we're going on a journey, going on an adventure, and it's the things that happen to us along the way that are important in those those experiences that we had as characters, and obviously as players that we we imagined, and we weren't in a hurry to progress, to go up this level or go up the next level, or become more and more powerful. As we did become more powerful, because the characters had been around for such a long time, it seemed like, in reality it was probably only about 3 years, but we'd been around for such a long time, so many hours, like hours and hours and hours of gameplay time. We really sort of found ourselves in those skins of those characters to some degree. We really knew our characters so well that we could really play them, and we had all that history and that experience to draw from. All those fake experience that we could draw from in terms of the role playing thing. So that was one of the things that we did, and actually one of the things that I did to really ruin the game was, as I said at the beginning, is I bribed my characters with special special magic items. And I gave one guy a bag of holding. Do you remember what a bag of holding is, Dan?
Yep, I sure do.
So the idea is that, you're limited in D&D with how much treasure you can carry out. So you have to make decisions. So do I want this gold crown, or do I want these gems, or do I want this magic item? Because I can't carry any more. I'm going to be encumbered, was the word. So you have to. You're limited in that way, and we've talked before about having a limited character, or a limited, character with a flaw, or an army that doesn't, that has some negatives, and always playing elite veteran troops isn't always the thing. There's more to it than that. But what I did is I gave one guy a bag of holding, one guy a magical sword with light, and giving your characters anything that has light. Suddenly you've taken away the restriction on them that has that means that they can only go into the dungeon for a certain amount of time because they've only got so many torches. So I'd taken away that limitation of light. I'd taken away the limitation of weight and encumbrance. I gave one guy a ring of invisibility, so I'd taken away the ability to be able to for the monsters to always detect them, and that really screwed up my game. And for those 3 years I was sort of fighting against those things that I'd done. And so I warn against people that advance their characters too quickly and become too strong, because if you do, you miss out on the fun of being a grunt.
Yeah. It's there's a certain appeal to being the fantastical version of kids on bikes around the neighborhood solving mysteries.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I think it's because you can relate to it to some degree. Whereas if you're,
I think so,
Superman or whatever other thing at the time that was too fantastical, then it seems somehow more abstracted from what you can relate to, and it's hard to role play.
So I think this is a perfect segue then, and describing memories for you. So I'm going to go into now what modules or adventures made the greatest enduring impressions and memories for you, and why.
Okay, so I have some paper. I have some modules here. Not all of them for some reason. I'm a bit worried about that. But I'll go. So the first one that I'll go for is the Forest of Doom. I bet you weren't expecting that. Never heard of that? That's because it was never really released as a module, I don't think. What it is it's a module that was released in a dungeon magazine, because dungeon was for DMs, wasn't it? Dragon was for players.
I don't know, and it was only later I realised that dungeon even existed, and I think dungeon outlasted dragon. But I was Yeah, so
here you go.
Tell us more. So it was released in the magazine.
It was in Dragon. So the idea was, I think, with those two Dungeon and Dragon magazines, is that I think Dragon was for players and Dungeon was for DMs. So the players couldn't get their hands on. I could be wrong, but I think that's the way it worked. So the players couldn't get their hands on the modules, because nothing's going to spoil your Christmas like getting under your mum's bed and finding what you've got coming for Christmas presents, right? Yeah. And it's called The Forest of Doom, an adventure for AD&D players designed by Scott Butler. And it's first place in the module design contest, apparently. I'm just reading now. I hadn't remembered that. And it's I've got it here laminated. So it's about maybe 10 pages long with maps and everything. And what it was a tree that some dark elves were living in.
Oh, I remember this.
And it's got the cross section of the tree here as I look at it in the lower levels with some grunty characters, and then up the top. Now I haven't looked at this for 30 years, so my memory could be a bit dodgy on it. But I seem to remember that in the top of this tree there were dark elves, which were brand new. The Drow were brand new. Yes, it was. Drow Barracks, room number 26. The Drow was a brand new character class that had never been heard of, and it had just been released in Dragon magazine as an optional class, from like not character class, but as an optional monster that you could use. There was never such a thing beforehand. And the reason that I particularly remember it is because Russell, whose character's name I unfortunately don't remember, which is a bit bad, but he was an elf or a half elf from memory, and he fell out of this tree. Now this tree was 300 foot tall or something like that, and so he fell, and I remember trying to work out he had to get some materials out of his spell vest, and then cast a spell. I think it was fly or featherfall. Actually, it might have been featherfall, so that he wouldn't fall and hit the ground. And I remember going to our science teacher and saying, we need to calculate how long it would take for a man falling from 300 feet to hit the ground. And my science teacher was amazed because I was really bad at school and I just didn't care and I was a bad kid. But I had to calculate it out. So 10 meters per second is the acceleration, and how long was it going to take? So he helped us calculate it out, and then we were able to ascertain that from falling from that time he was able to get his segment that he required for the spell, cast the spell, featherfall to the ground, and not die. So we had to end our session and resume the next Friday night to be able to do that. And I don't remember too much about that, but I remember that was a good, I guess, indicator of the depth that we were. I mean, we were kind of geeks and that, but we weren't over the top geeks. But that sort of showed how serious we were about the game. That we would seek out that real world information to calculate something like that. So that was one.
Nice.
The second one is Castle Amber, Dungeon Module X2, Chateau d'Amberville. That's best and worst module I ever played. So without going into a 27-hour podcast, basically what that did is it gave us an introduction to plane travel. So we started out as a basic module. You go and you crash in the front door and you beat up a few orcs or whatever. I don't really remember the content of it, but probably
Kobolds. Yeah, Kobolds always got it.
And then as you progressed through this chateau and up to the higher levels, you ended up being able to. You went through a door and stepped out into. Oh, maybe I shouldn't tell. Oh. Anyway.
Yeah, well, we can't have spoilers.
Plane travel.
No, you have to give a wee bit of
I don't really remember too much about it, but I remember that it was, how in The Hobbit, you've got, it's a very small world, right? Bilbo is, he leaves the Shire, he goes on an adventure, he comes home, and the world goes on around, the world goes on. Like, nothing's really changed. It's a limited adventure. He hasn't impacted the world. He's just gone out and had something, and his neighbour 2 doors down probably doesn't know any difference, right? Lord of the Rings,
exactly. Picked up some little ring on the way.
Lord of the Rings, on the other hand, is a world-changing, a planet-changing module, to use that term. So you've got a bunch of guys that go out and do something, and as a result, life on Middle Earth is going to either survive or fail based on their things. Lord of the Rings 2, which there isn't such a thing, but where are you going to go from there? The sequel to Lord of the Rings, where's it going to go? Like, who are you going to fight next? You've already beat Sauron. So there's nowhere really to go, and that's fine for a book. But in a game of Dungeons and Dragons, where do you go once you've done plane travel and defeated a god and whatever, and it was sort of, it got us to that pinnacle, and it was the best module we've ever played, but it reached such a high pinnacle that how would you go back to just spooning over a few kobolds after that? So
I agree, and I think that the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons is without a doubt a very good edition. Yeah, I have a couple of beefs in it. One is that I feel like everything is dictated and everything. Now, this is good rules writing, but not necessarily good role-playing framework, I guess. is that everything's got a rule for it. Every single thing. Like I've sat there before and gone, someone's fallen down, and I've gone, okay, well, I'm going to give you a 30% chance of that. And someone said to me, oh, actually, there's a table for that. And I'm like, well, I don't care if there's a table for that. I'm giving you a 30% chance. Like,
that's
but in
how
a
I play
nice
it
way.
too,
Do you know what I mean? But there's literally a table for it somewhere, and and players have access to all the books, and they can tell you, you're sort of playing it wrong, and it's like, no, I don't want to play it by that chart, and I don't want you to have to play it by the chart. I want us to play our game. I want us to play the game, which is our game. So I felt limited in that way. But another thing I don't like is I don't like the way that the modules are they're all mega importance. It's like, the Abyss module adventure, we played it, and it was like, you're a first level character and you go down into the Abyss, and suddenly you're fighting for the survival of Greyhawk. The Forgotten Realms. You're fighting for the survival of Forgotten Realms, and it's like, well, where do we go after that? We want to be kids on bikes riding around, playing, solving adventures. We want to be Sinister Secret Assault Marsh, creating like 10 different hooks. We could go in 10 different directions, 10 more slightly, rockier adventures. We want to be abducted by villagers against the cult of the reptile god. I want those sorts of adventures. I don't want everything to be, against interplanar elementals, princes of the apocalypse. I don't want, where do you go to from that?
Yep, that's well, we concur, Dan. We can play together. But there's a hint for you young whippersnappers. Firstly, kids, you stay off my grass. Secondly, kids, you play The Hobbit, not Lord of the Rings.
Yep. And the best thing about The Hobbit is, that ring that you picked up, it could be really important. You're leaving it open to play another slight tier up and then another slight tier up, isn't it? Yeah, really good. So I'm interested then. So would any of those couple of modules we talked about come into your favourite modules? So I'm going to ask you now, rank your 3 favourite modules across any edition or version of the game. Any edition or version. 3 favourite modules or adventures. Number 1 being best, so you can start off at number 3, then go number 2, then number 1, or the other way around, whatever way you want to go for it.
Including rulebooks and etc. Or just modules?
Well, I've said modules, but I guess remembering that in the rulebooks there's generally a sample dungeon.
So
there you go.
Best one of all.
So it doesn't have to be the best. It could be your
favourite.
So best by favourite, go for it.
First one, keep on the Borderlands. Yeah, just because it's what we cut our teeth on. So you always remember your first, as they say. So there's that. Number 2, I guess I'd have to say Castle Amber, because it was just so vast, and the rewards were so amazing. But it broke the game too. Luckily, we played it later as well, so that worked well. It was towards the end that we played it, and then the third one is called A Dead King's Ransom. You heard of that one?
Oh, no, I haven't heard that one.
That's because I made it, or I still am making it. So I love the idea of making your own module, making your own adventure. So I began building this thing, 8 years ago, and every couple of years I come back and write a couple more pages, and one day I'll play it. In reality, I probably never will, but I do love the idea, being a DM at heart, of building an entire, not world, but building an entire story and the backstory and everything else. So I just love that idea. Unfortunately, you just don't get time now to do that sort of thing. We don't get huge. Any grown-up person with with a full life doesn't get time to sort of invest huge amounts in that sort of thing. But I love the idea that it's there, that I'm working on it, and it's in the background, and one day I'll finish that. You never know.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to it very much. All right, I'll give you mine, shall I? Okay, so for me, I'm going to rank them 3, 2, 1. So my third favourite is going to be the Lost Mines of Phandelver, the one that comes in the D&D 5th edition.
Oh, really?
starter
Okay,
set.
yeah, good. Okay.
And I think this is the archetypical starter adventure where, you meet in the tavern. I think it does a great job. And my friend Dan Blake, who is I would say he's an excellent dungeon master, and he's a good player, and he's been playing a long, long time as well. So he mentioned to me is basically Lost Mines of Phandelver. So Phandalin, the town, is basically like a Wild West town. And I went, of course. It's by a mine. There's all these ruffians come into town and duff people up and have punch-ups and basically the fantasy version of shoot 'em ups and then leave town again. You've got people trying to be lynched in town. It's a really, really clever thing. And it's also a sandbox, which reminds me of a sandbox campaign that you can go in almost any direction and do almost anything as well. All the hills surrounding the town reminds me very much of Bone Hill, and we'll come on to that in a
Okay,
minute.
good.
The second one for me is Keep on the Borderlands. Very, very close second, and that's because of all the memories that go with it. And who can remember, spooned over 6 kobolds, and accidentally walking into the wrong level and going into like a level's caves that were well above where you were supposed to go, Woe betide the adventure party who entered the caves sort of at the wrong level and went to the the harder caves first, I guess.
Yeah.
But classic again, with the place to start out from, so you can you can interact with people, you can have a bit of mystery or whatever around it, you can create interaction between characters, that side of role playing, and then you've got your combat side of role playing as well when you go to the caves. And the first one for me is the Secret of Bone Hill.
Yep.
And that's because it's the first sort of campaign module that I played with a group outside of yours, or observed out a group outside of yours, and I am playing it with the party that I'm playing with now.
Fantastic.
It's their first module, so that's great as well. Really good. And I love it because it's a sandbox. You can literally do whatever you want, and it's levels 2 to 5, I think it is. My guys have started at level 1, but because it's a sandbox, you can throw in all sorts of other side adventures and stuff, and you leave all these plot hooks unanswered or open for them. You can build up their levels until they eventually might decide to go to that place, Bone Hill, that people have been telling them about. It's a really great adventure. You can take them any direction you want to go.
Fantastic. Oh, that's good. Yeah.
I'm interested though if your dungeon party. So of your top 2, do you think if your dungeon party you're running at the time, your group of adventurers or players are sitting in front of you now, do you think they would also choose those? Why?
Castle Amber they would choose. They would choose that for sure, because
Yeah.
I don't know what else they would choose, just in terms of I guess remembrance and thinking back, and just the fun of it. But they'd choose Castle Amber. The reason is because the rewards. So again, be careful with the rewards you give out to your party DM, because you make them so overpowered. I remember a conversation I was having with these guys, and they were saying, if there's any hidden doors around here, we just find them. Like, nobody can hide doors from us. And I'm trying to argue, in my whiny voice, the opposite. I'm trying to argue, there's always a chance, there's always a chance. They said, we've got this, and we've got this, and we've got this, and we've got this, and we've got this. There is no way that a hidden door can remain hidden from us. And, they were right, because they'd loaded up on magic items. So I guess that's maybe the tension between the DM and the players. Often, unless you have a particularly altruistic player, often the players are just wanting to get better and better and better and more powerful. And as the DM, you're constantly trying to repress that. because you're trying
Yeah.
to. I mean, me as the DM, your mileage may vary. You're constantly trying to repress that so that you can you can string it out and have better and longer adventures and a richer development, a richer progression to to those higher levels.
Yeah. Right, Rex. I'm going to hit you now with a question that I could have asked you a lot of times, but I've
Okay.
been saving it to now. So, why do you really play? What drives you to this game? To the game? Why do you really play?
That is a good question, Dan. I've never really broken it down. I guess it's some people go to the gym, enjoy the gym for for exercising their muscles. I go to the gym because I'm fat, and I want to be healthier and later in life. But there's no sense of enjoyment from me. Other people, go to uni and study really complicated things for, to get a degree in this because it's going to get a good job or whatever. But then you get that small group of people that just do something for purely the sake of doing it. And I guess that's what I get out of D&D is the chance to exercise my imagination. So that inner kernel,
Yep.
I have to say, that's it. So just the chance to, and especially as the DM, just to take something and just, like a hook, you're in the tavern and the woman's there. You mention the abandoned factory at the end of the street, and the woman goes pale, starts to quiver, and walks away slowly. That hook. It just blossoms. It can just blossom. You start building on things and building on things and building on things and building on things, and before you know it, you have a whole series of modules that you can run based on that one encounter. And every pivotal point along the way gives you that chance to blossom things out. So just an exercise in imagination.
Oh, that's a good answer.
No,
Well done.
When you ask a question like that, it's like, okay, I got to come up with something. But yeah, that's for me. And what about you?
I think for me, it's the same reason, but the fact you can do things as well that, yeah. So, if I was really honest, the things that get me are the ability to role play and look for that adventure in life, I guess. I mean, how many times do that thing about, the woman you mentioned, in life, how many times those conversations happen that you feel like you've left things open in life, but you can't adventure because people have property and people have, there's boundaries to things you can do and stuff like that, and you wish you could do it in real life. Another side of things, I guess, is that in real life, I'm sort of, as a soldier of a couple of different armies, I've been caught in a struggle between good versus evil, or one side versus the other, both believing they're right, or one side not necessarily being evil at all, and one side not necessarily being good, but being a matter of perspectives. And the ability to, I guess, in a fantastical way, not in a voyeuristic way or wishing this could happen really in any extent, but being able to play out that good versus evil play, the theatre of fantasy, and being able to go out and slay something because it has done things that show it's evil, and being able to go out to slay that evil dragon or something that's been terrorizing the villages. That's quite a cool thing, I guess. And you don't get those moments too often in real life where you can make a stand like that. And I think a lot of people might also find that interesting and exciting to them as well. But maybe I'm one of the few, but I really enjoy that.
Yeah,
so,
a good answer too,
yeah.
I think. And especially, let's not go down the rabbit hole of alignment, but I quite like that idea in terms of being a player. How do you play your alignment? Good versus evil, chaotic versus lawful. It's a complicated thing, and it allows you to get some perspective on life too. I mean, I don't know about living life through the D&D eye, but it is interesting and it is food for thought. But that's another thing, actually, which is probably a good segue to another point, and that is, were you aware of any of the issues surrounding the whole, the Temple of Elemental Evil and some of the other stuff that was going on in the US about like MAD, Mothers Against Dungeons and Dragons, and that sort of thing? Was that on your radar, being a little bit later on and perhaps a little bit more worldly than we were?
I think it was probably happening while you were playing, but we only become aware of it here sort of when I was playing, and I think it was when I started playing, D&D had sort of passed its, like when I was watching you play, it was still in its heyday. And I remember, the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon on in the mornings, Saturday mornings here on our kids' TV channel before I went to play football or soccer. Just fitted it in, it was very much in its heyday. But as I began to play, it had passed through it, and it had suffered from some of those things, undoubtedly. And yet there wasn't really any bad feeling in New Zealand, as so to speak. So undoubtedly had a tough time, but I hadn't really seen it. But I did notice. I did know that Gary Gygax had left. Like, I knew he'd done his Cyborg Commando thing afterwards, and we tried play Cyborg Commando. Roddy, Donald, Carl, and I I thought it was just pants, but that was because I didn't. In reality, here's the truth. I didn't like it because it wasn't what I'd seen being played. To me, role playing was what I'd seen being played by you guys. I actually suffer from that even to this day. I suffer from imposter syndrome when I'm a dungeon master, and I feel like I haven't been as descriptive as you would have done if you were the dungeon master, or Roddy would have done if he was the dungeon master. But I compare a lot to those old sessions, which is why they're so amazing to me and held in such. And maybe it's the memory that makes me think that the standard was higher than what it
rose-coloured
was.
spectacles, I think, Dan.
Very possibly. In fairness, very possibly. But I also think you're very good at what you did, and so was Roddy, and my first dungeon master myself. But I do get imposter syndrome. When you've read your description of or invented your description and spoken it to the group, and you're like, what have I done enough there? Have I done enough have I added enough? Have I put in enough little hooks? Have I over described it? Have I talked over them and filled the space when I didn't need to? Yeah, so it's interesting. I sometimes think about that.
Yeah, I guess I'm pretty critical of some of the stuff that I see on YouTube, and well, I guess that's where you see it now, YouTube. Every now and then, every couple of years, I'll come back to it and go, oh, maybe I should play D&D again, and watch spend an evening, stay up till 2 a.m. watching YouTube videos and that. And I'm pretty critical of other people playing because we were so insular. We just played what we knew, and our style evolved. Thankfully, I think we did a good job, as evidenced by the longevity of our campaign. But there's a lot of stuff that I just look at and I just cringe, and I say, I don't think you're doing the game any favors with that. But that's just my perspective as well, based on what I've experienced. So it's a great game, but it's really dependent on the DM. And you've always got that player as well, but you can, as a good DM, you can manage that player, that guy that just wants to metagame and everything else. But the only time that actually, here's one for you. Worst D&D experience you've ever had. I tried to run a game at a Ventura Scout camp, and it was a great setting. We were out in the New Zealand bush, and it was in a cave, in an area where we'd been caving, and we were
Oh wow!
We were stopped for the night, and it had gotten dark, and there was an area of a bush, and then there was all these weird shaped rocks that were as part of this caving complex. We were camping there, and then at 8 o'clock or whatever, we went across to the spot and had a couple of flaming torches set up, and we tried to play a game there with about 30 people. So the idea was it was sort of play by committee, so they would propose what they wanted to do, and then we would sort of do it for them. It just did not translate at all to that big group. And yeah,
Right. Okay.
so yeah, I probably gave them a bad impression. But the other thing, coming back to what I was saying about about some of the issues about D&D is that, and I read through some of the stuff recently because I thought it was quite interesting, particularly after my wife said, after we'd been together for a long time, and she said, "Oh, have you ever played D&D?" And her face just went pale. It's just like, "Oh, I'm not going to play that. That's just evil. No, only evil people do that. Satan worshippers or whatever." I was like, "Really? Really?" And I just had no idea. That was the sort of environment that she'd grown up in. Is that, they had been warned about it. Formally warned by people and institutions that she was involved with, about how bad and evil this game was. I was like, "Oh, right, okay." So I started tracking down the whole, all the details that I could find about that Mothers Against Dungeons and Dragons and all that, and it was quite interesting. I mean, that particular one wasn't even Dungeons and Dragons; it was Tunnels and Trolls, and they weren't even playing the game. They were doing more of LARPing, like a live action role play.
Yeah,
it's not even D&D. It's something completely different. But it's easy to pin. It's like the evils of Coca-Cola. Nobody ever talks about the evils of Pepsi.
Yeah. Well, while we're on that subject, I think like I mentioned why the reason why I play, but I think you can learn a lot about your moral compass by playing it. I challenged somebody the other day and said to him, when my player wanted to do something, I said that's not against your alignment. No, sorry, that is against your alignment. And a paladin was in the group of paladins said, "No, we're not doing that." And there are repercussions from them not wanting to burn the female bugbears alive in a room. Which meant they were ambushed later by the bugbear females and the young as they went through the same area on a different mission later on. However, they had stuck to their alignment, and the paladin had stuck to his guns. And so that was the way it should have been. But I learned a lot about what is... Oh, sorry. I formulated a lot of my own opinions about what is neutral, what is lawful versus good, what's evil versus chaotic and stuff like that from looking at those mental charts in the D&D rule books. And I tell you what, those charts I still don't know anything about, especially the one, the A&D rule book. Like, what is the story with that? I learnt more from the picture of above one of those charts of, I think it might be in the basic handbook or is it in the AD handbook, where it's got a guy about to stab, I think, a goblin prisoner, or something like that. And so he's stabbing them. Another guy's sort of going no, and another guy's standing back with his hand on his lip, sort of going, "Should I intervene or shouldn't I?" It's a very provocative picture, that one, that said more to me than that actual diagram.
Yeah, it is interesting, and that's it's, maybe that conversation. That's another whole podcast, like not another podcast. But another, that's a morality podcast, not another wargaming podcast.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to go down there, but it's very interesting, isn't it?
I've formed a lot of my opinions. Everybody does. Everybody forms a lot of their opinions about right and wrong and what sort of person they are, during those early adolescent years, and that was quite interesting. In later years, I've sort of transcended those ideas to some degree and got a different perspective on it. But yeah, it is really interesting. And you talk about.
I learnt a lot. I mean, I found that I was the guy who wanted to stand on the wall and save the villagers.
Yeah.
And so subsequently, I created a defender personality type, and I'm a soldier.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, as they say, there's wolves, sheep, and sheepdogs. So there you go.
Yep.
Morality based on what's the name of the movie? American Sniper.
American Sniper. Yeah.
Yeah.
So back to D&D then, away from our learnings from the alignment chart. What module or adventure's been published that you know about that you want to play the most and you've never had a chance?
Yeah,
yet?
That's an easy one. I don't actually know the name of it though. giants something or other, and what it was the giants, frost giant, something of the frost giants. Maybe I should have been.
Jarl of the
Yeah.
Frost Giant, I think it is.
Maybe
Jarl
I
of
should
the
have
Frost
been slightly
Giant
better
King.
prepared. But that was the module that we finished on. We finished our group.
Yep.
We got partway through it. I think it was levels 10 to 14 or something like that. So we had a really experienced group. And I love the idea of playing in a wintry scene. I think it's my New Zealand heritage. I love to wargame in the winter. I love to, even my own module that I sort of been making over the last 20 years is based in a frosty sort of environment. And I was really looking forward to it. And then for whatever reason, I think it was just the guys, came into their final year of school and they were preparing for to go to uni, and the writing was on the wall, and we never got it finished. So that was the one that I would really like to play, just to finish it, just to say that's it.
Yeah,
we're done. Mind you, after Castle Amber, you could probably pretty much hang up your sword at that point because you've saved the world.
Yeah.
You?
I tell you what, I would love, and I think this is actually aligning myself to where, to a point where it might actually become possible one day. I would love to play Tomb of Horrors, or is it Palace of the Silver Princess or something like that, about the Lost Tower of Inverness. One of those tournament modules where you just get given the characters and you play that module. And I would actually love to set up an event of, people playing that, whatever set of rules, so we could debate about whether it's going to be old school A&D or the new 5th edition or whatever this case might be, but play like in a tournament setting where you've got several different groups in the building, and they're all playing the same module, no wandering monsters, etc. All those sort of tournament constraints they had at Gen Con back at the days, and just playing basically a what do they call it? Sort of the zoo. No, that's the name of it. A funhouse module. That's what they call it. One of these ones that's been populated by the rogue wizard or whatever, and the party's been taunted into going in to retrieve, or maybe has been sent in to retrieve the 4 magic artifacts or whatever the case is, and just work through like the Tomb of Horrors or something like that in that setting and see what happens.
Yeah, that's
I'd love to play
that's
like
pretty
that.
new. That's a new playstyle to me. I've not really heard of that before.
Yeah, and I think for most people it probably is, and it's certainly different to what we like normally. It is certainly different to what we like normally. I'm not saying I'd like it more. I would just love to either play it with a group with those characters, with those ready-made characters or whatever that have obviously got a couple of items and stuff like that, and some reasonable skills and abilities that can, if they play it right, defeat the obstacles in that dungeon. I'd just love to play like that.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah.
I just love
I'd
to
love
play.
to do it now, and the fact I'd go away and come back for short holidays or whatever the case is in the next year or so. It'd be great to sort of do it like that, because it means you don't have to take the group or whatever's current characters into this dungeon. You can take these ready-made ones. It doesn't matter if this ready-made one dies.
I just like to play. Anything. Yeah. There was talk of it at our local gaming club, actually. They were saying, we played D&D with this guy, and it was just like, it was the worst experience we ever had. I said, yeah, you're not playing it properly, that's why. You need to play a game with me. And they said, oh, yeah, okay. And then I just went cold on it because I just didn't have the time to do it. But
yeah, it's a commitment. So you're not playing D&D
correct.
now, is
but
that
you
what
are.
I have been, yes. So my group has been playing in I guess again around Restonford and Bone Hill, and they've been to the ruined watchtower and found a small child's body, and a wandering militia patrol sort of found them, and then they sort of let the guy from the wandering militia patrol take the credit for retrieving this boy's body from the giant rats, and then he's been a sort of a a contact inside the Baron of Restonford's keep. That when they lubricate him with enough whiskey and alcohol, he manages to tell them a few rumours and what he's seen and heard. They've been out on a few little missions around the place. So the Baron's background involves, their sort of their former family fortunes and keep and lands being around the area of Bone Hill to the west, and they were attacked by a large force of bugbears led by what was their family's wizard advisor at the time, Telvar, but he was getting more and more evil powers, and he couldn't control those. And eventually, the rumours are that there's now undead roam the lands of Bone Hill, and even the bugbears that fell into disfavour with him had to move away due to the legends of the undead in the vicinity. So the bugbears sort of set up, becoming bands of brigands and so on, so forth, in the hills just to the north of Restonford. So they've been there and cleared a large sort of population of those, and returned some items to the Baron, due to the fact that the characters want to keep this abandoned watchtower that they've searched the dungeons and found a secret entrance to the dungeons, and they've got some treasure and stuff in there. They've had to basically pledge themselves to this Baron, and he's due to their success with the bugbears and retrieving a family heirloom, it appears, although they don't know the full story around it yet. They were very pleased to get this treasure back, him and his wife, the Baroness. He's now pledged them that they'll get his special missions, and as part of his militia, as part of their contract for buying this watchtower off him. So 3,000 gold pieces it's costing them, and then they had to pledge allegiance to him for special missions as part of his militia. So they're currently setting out on some more missions there now under a new dungeon master as I head away to do my thing in the real world.
Sounds fantastic. Even just the names, Restonford, is just so evocative to me because of the history. I don't remember really much about it. I remember the maps, but not really the content. But yeah, the names are very evocative.
Yeah, for sure. It's it's a very so when we say evocative, it evokes not only memories of the thing, but positive memories of the time. And I'm glad we've had an opportunity to talk about this on here, and I hope that it evokes nice memories for other people. Maybe we've got some grognards listening that have played before. Maybe have some players of the game now, which in the current iteration, or they've got some older material and playing on the old edition. I think anyone is, provided you're enjoying it and getting what you want out of it, is a fantastic thing for people to experience, isn't it?
It is, and I sort of thought about this. I hadn't really prepared anything, but I really wanted to just go over some of the things that Dungeons and Dragons gives you. When you look at it, the things that we've learned from it. So Dungeons and Dragons gives you, and this is why you should play it with your kids. And I thought about, maybe making a list and stapling it to every parent's forehead. What do you think?
Yeah. Okay. So what would your list say?
It gives you reading skills, like real reading skills. Reading something, getting the detail, like the absolute detail, cutting over, getting through the red herrings and getting down to the actual detail, those subtleties. Gives you the ability to be able to learn to read aloud. And project yourself in essentially public speaking. Those descriptive skills, your emotions, you're building up emotions through your senses, the slow drip of water, and be able to describe things like get the marrow of it, and it teaches you map reading, visualization, being able to judge distances on a map. It teaches you 3D visualization. You get a corkscrew dungeon that goes down, and then the door comes off to the left, and then there's a room on the left, and then, are you back there yet? Are you back at the main dungeon? Is there a possibility? It teaches you to be able to get on with other people, both in your party in terms of gameplay. It teaches you the ability to be able to not just whack everyone with a sword if you've got a good DM that's running the game properly, but to be able to reason with people and negotiate. And what's this person's motives? What's their motivation? Why are they being like they are? That sort of stuff is gold in the workplace, in real life. And as well as that, dealing with people's
sure is.
Frailties and fears and emotions in terms of your players. Some people aren't confident. Some people are pigs. How do you deal with those people? How do you placate the guy that wants to just roll over the top of everybody else and encourage the girl that that's shy and doesn't really want to exert herself? How many times have I been to a committee meeting or something like that, or a training session where I've been lecturing people, and I've had to have the skill of kind of suppressing one person and encouraging others to speak up and be involved. Those sorts of things are just gold. You got a couple for me, Dan?
Yeah, I sure have. I mean, I just went on that officer selection board last year, and the ability to look over a description of a scenario and boil it down to what was important in order to quickly choose a course of action, quickly and effectively choose a course of action that was going to succeed in the time given with the materials at hand, and get the best result is really an art. But yeah, and you're so right. Interpersonal skills, communication skills, negotiation skills. I mean, you can sit there and you can look around your school committee and you can see who's the dwarf fighter, and you can see who's the paladin. You can see who's the shy, retiring cleric, perhaps. You can see some of these people there, and it's quite humorous, and you look at it that way. But you can have that insight, and then you may be wrong as well, because underneath those character they've got, their personality. The character is what we show the world. Our personality is something deep below that as well. So that's being able to change your personality or inject your personality into a character, or create a new character that either you want to play, a part of you that you're afraid to play in real life, or you don't get an opportunity to play, is a fantastic thing. It's got to be healthy.
And just, looking at things from the other person's perspective. I mean, how many times, I've been in business, I've had multiple businesses. You go to staff meeting and you just see all those caricatures kind of superimposed above all those other people, but you know how to use those people. You know that person. Yeah, sure, they're not strong at public speaking. They're very quiet. They're not going to do great with the aggressive customer that wants the thing. But that's the guy that's going to get the job done. He's going to be, he's going to be the guy that does the detail. He's going to be the guy that I rely on when I need my numbers. Whereas this person's the extrovert. I need to put them in a role that's going to promote their ability to be able to get on with other people, or bargain with the
putting aces into places, and figuratively working out of order of march for the task at hand, an order of march into the dungeon.
Exactly. So I think at the end of the day, everybody should play Dungeons and Dragons. You should start immediately, and you should definitely play with your kids. Yeah,
for sure. And there's a whole lot to be learnt as wargamers as well. I mean, we call it the ultimate campaign. There's a whole lot to be learnt, the ability to create a map, create your own scenarios. I guess play for the narrative rather than just playing for the win sometimes as well. A whole lot of what we learnt from wargaming and how we formulated our wargaming lives came from the desire to inject something more into little plastic soldiers based on your experiences in Dungeons & Dragons, didn't they, Rex?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, this comes to the end of our first Wandering Monsters podcast. Rest assured, I don't think we're going to be doing a different game system every single week. For those of you who've listened to this one, I hope you've enjoyed our foray into a different subject. We're not going to be doing it all the time, but we really wanted to share this one with you all, and I hope you've enjoyed something about it, and maybe learn a bit more about us, and maybe thought of some excellent memories you might have in your past as well. What do you think, Rex?
Yeah, I think so. I've certainly enjoyed it. I'd love to play the game. Ultimately, I'm not going to be able to for a few years, certainly while I have younger kids. I'd like to play it again, but even if I never played it again, just the memories that we've had with those with the mates that I played it with, and the things that it's given me, it's just it's so much more than a game, and it's hard to describe. And if you're a guy that's that's just played Warhammer 40k, and then you've come over to Bold Action and you found this Bold Action podcast or wargaming podcast that likes to do a lot of bold action, you're going to probably think that we're weirdos. But it really is something that's completely outside your sphere of experience if you've never played it before. And you should give it a go.
I think so. And I think we'd like to dedicate this podcast to all the people that have played in any role-playing games, especially Dungeons & Dragons, with us over the years. You've been positive for our mental health and been positive experience with us. Anyone who's joined and been one of that odd character that's turned up a couple of times, hasn't liked it and walked away, we've still learnt something from you. But we've definitely learnt and experienced more from those people that have turned up at whatever frequency we've had it. And thank you for experiencing that with us, and thanks for taking us along. And we remember you and remember the good times we've had, don't we, Rex?
Sure. Yep. Thanks, guys. And thanks, Dan, for coming along and doing this, because it's been a real trip down memory lane.
Yeah. Thank you very much, guys. We'll see you soon.
See you soon. Bye now.
Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find our long forgotten gold. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night, the fire was red, it flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find our long forgotten gold. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night, the fire was red, it flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light.
Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells, in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. The dragon's ire, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon. The dwarves, they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away ere break of day to win our harps and gold from him. As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands and by cunning and by magic moving through him, a fierce and jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something Tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains and explore the caves and wear a sword instead of a walking stick.